So today we have Dan Alexander of the game Lander on the show. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Kenny. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So Dan, you're the creator of Lander. I'd love to hear more about the game, how it plays, who's the game's for, and things like that.
Okay, yeah, great. So Lander is a 2 to 4 player resource management strategy game set on the first planet outside of our solar system after the crash. So we've basically flown there, the ship's crash landed, a whole bunch of crew have died, and you play the corporate representative trying to kind of stake claim to the spoils of this new world. The game has 3 different game modes, so you can play a tutorial, you can play it in the weeknight with a kind of a shorter version, or you can play it like the full in-depth kind of heavy Euro game. So there's kind of a different flavor for a lot of people, not necessarily everyone. The people that would most be kind of into Lander would be people who like strategy games, who are more on the Euro style of game. So, you know, likable things in the industry already. So terraforming Mars. There's elements of kind of Catan where you're kind of exploring, getting more resources in there. And then there's strategy elements from like a bunch of other games. But the key thing with Lander is you have a crew and you're managing your crew. And there's a deck of 50 crew cards, but in each game you only draw 7 per player. So it means every time you play, you have completely different crew. I mean, even playing with somebody who's a friend in Houston, as my job takes me around the world, he'd played a bunch of games with me, and after playing a bunch of games, there was a crew member was like, "Who's this? I've never seen this person before." So there's really like a lot of depth for you to explore in the game. And the idea is that you have these different missions to complete, and they're construction, logistics, and research. You have to complete a set number in each category, and then it's the player with the most stars wins the game. So there's all sorts of like different pathways for you to be able to win. There's cards which will, you know, either promote you or knock someone else down. But the amount of take that in there is quite refined. So it's not just all luck based. It's very kind of, you know, you basically like play the cards you have in your hand. One kind of line that we kind of joke amongst ourselves about is that Lander is like life, or life is like Lander. You basically have to like play the cards you're dealt, and when something bad happens to you, you kind of have to keep a cool head and figure out how you're going to get around that problem. And there always seems to be like a way around somehow for you to kind of get back into a winning position. So it kind of keeps all players engaged, and yeah, it's kind of been a really fun journey to kind of take it to where it is now.
You mentioned the crew member cards. I'd love to learn more about those. Any examples you have about those cards?
Yeah, so when we first started making the game, all the way back in 2015, we started making it. It was a battling game. And then we had this problem with the theme whereby we couldn't figure out why we'd travel to another planet and then battle against each other. So we kind of stripped loads of stuff back, and we had this crew. And we changed the crew a little bit, and now the crew are a crew of engineers, scientists, and operations. And each of the corporations will hire these people to work for them, and they have those different classes, and they have some character traits. But the really cool thing about the crew is that they each have their own leadership ability. So when you make them the leader, you can do whatever the individual thing is that they do. And all the crew have their own artwork. To find the crew, we started by just pulling images from the internet, but we used a bunch of famous people, so we couldn't use those as our crew characters. So I went into the world and basically just went up to random strangers and went, "Do you want to be in my board game?" And took photos of them, and then the artist painted them, and we have them as our crew members now. And that really kind of gets you into the kind of the feel of the game. I don't know if you've ever played a game where the character is like a drawn alien or something like that, you think, oh, that's kind of cool. But being human, I think that we have an emotional attachment to different people. You know, maybe they look like they're smiley and friendly. Maybe they look like they're grumpy and angry. There might be different reasons why you might love or hate that kind of crew member, or their ability, or what have you. And I think that because our characters are human and we're not, you know, centuries and centuries in the future, it's kind of near future, that we haven't changed so much as a human race. And when you play the game and your crew member dies that you've spent some time investing in, it's like, no, you know, you really kind of get a feeling for that loss because of the connection you kind of relate to them in the artwork.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's really cool that you have that emotional connection with the characters that you have in your crew. I think it's really cool that there's so many different characters as well, which I'm sure adds for lots of replay value too. You mentioned your friend, you know, he played with you lots of times, but he still discovered a new card after playing many, many times. So, what would you say is the biggest factor towards replay value for your game?
Oh, there's so much. We have our board is all drawn from tiles that lock together, and you draw randomly 18 tiles from a set of 54 each game, and they are energy, food, and titanium. And then water is on those tiles as well, and half have water on and half don't. So each tile has a production value that's either, and in the first location, it's either 0, 1, or 2. And then when you upgrade the tile, it is either 0, 1, 2, or 3. And then in the third place, as you upgrade through, it's either 3, 4, 5, or 6. So you're encouraged to explore and develop your sectors to get more and more resources. So the board is different every time you play, and the way that the rivers kind of connect together makes interesting patterns. So no board is the same. The crew is completely different because the number of combinations of the crew that you could possibly have, they change. And even if you'd had the same crew deck stacked originally and the same tile deck, well, just the player order of whether you choose that crew member or not would potentially be different and add a whole different dimension to the game. Then there's a deck of 100 action cards. There's I think 35 training cards. There's traits, character traits. There's I think 30 of those, and there's items. I think there's 55 items. So all of this stuff means that because you only use a small kind of portion of all of those relatively big numbers, that every time you play, it might take you 3, 4, 5, 6 games before, you know, randomly you get to see somebody that you've not seen before, or use a cool item that you've not seen in the game before, and do some training that you've not seen before, that kind of thing. So the way it all links together is that the aim of the game is you're completing missions, and there's 20 missions of each category. And again, you might not complete so many missions, so the replayability is just infinite, and all the ways that you might go through the different possible options. You've got so much control over the game. I went on Geek and Sundry, went with Becca Scott, and her kind of end quote from the game was that, you know, if you lose a game and you've had all the options, you know that you lost it because it was your set of options and choices that made you lose the game. And if you think about it, you might have done this differently or that differently, which kind of makes you think, oh, that's exciting, I'll try that next game. Mm. And I think that one of the really exciting things about Lander is because of there's all of that depth, that it's almost like, I don't know, but almost like some kind of like, it's almost addictive because you just want to explore more. You want to explore more. Hey, should we have another game? Should we have another game kind of thing? So there's like you just start to uncover like, oh, I'll learn that strategy, I'll learn this strategy,
Hmm.
and so forth. And you play a game and you might not see those people that that strategy might be useful for maybe like 5 or 6 games or something.
Yeah.
So you learn like little bits of the game every time you play.
That's really cool. I think, yeah, there's lots of games that are very simple, and then there's lots of games that are very, very complex. And I think that, I personally like to go more towards a little more complex games in which there are strategy, in which there are, lessons learned from each game that you can then apply towards the next game. So
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. I'm pretty competitive, so I always want to win, of course. So I want to learn from my mistakes, and I want to then apply those to the next game, and next game, next game, next game. So that's really cool. That Lander is a game that's like that, in which you can maybe lose because you made the wrong choices. Maybe there's some luck too, but it's primarily because your wrong choices or your inexperience or things like that. And the
Yeah.
more you play, the better you get, and the more
Yeah.
likely you are to win in future games.
And one of the cool things is that I think that what Lander enables you to do, which there are a couple of board games that I've played enable you to do this as well. But I haven't seen a whole bunch. I haven't played millions of games, but I haven't seen a whole bunch, is that you have the game itself. But I think that in Lander you have like a game around the game, because you can hold your cards and you could fan them so everyone can see it, and you can, have a card hidden. And the card that you might hide, you can use to bluff people. You can almost like a poker kind of element in Lander, whereby there's kind of a game within the game that you can literally take an action card, which is either the good or the bad card, and it might be anything. And you might just play it on the table face down and go, are you sure you want to do that action? And it might be a nothing card, or it
Yeah.
might be a counter action, which if they like try and kill your crew member, you can kill their crew member. And there's only a couple in the deck. So the chance that you have it or not is slim. But if you do have it, you can, bluff your way into different maneuvers in the game as well. And then there's negotiation. So more experienced players, when you start to master the game that's on the table, you start to look up from just playing here to actually playing the players around you. And you might have a friend who just does not trade and doesn't want to engage in trading. No matter what you offer them, they don't want to trade. And you might have people that love to trade, but trading isn't integral to the game. It's an option. And it can be the difference between winning and losing. So
Wow.
you have that element of replayability as well, that as your friend group starts to kind of master the mechanics, but suddenly when you start seeing each other and you think, that player there, that's my friend, always likes to be the mayhem kind of friend. And there next, I'm thinking like, oh, so maybe I play a protection card here, or, there's all sorts of different elements that the more you play, the more kind of you uncover new kind of things that you might not have enjoyed in the previous games that you've had.
Yeah, I think the game within the game element is very cool, and I think games that can incorporate that are very fun, at least for my friend group as well. I mean, for my friend group, we're always like manipulating each other, we're trying to like get in each other's heads, trying to make them do something that would benefit us, but make it seem like it's benefiting themselves. So I think games that allow you to do that, having like another element to the game of like knowing your group and knowing the environment and playing on that. Personally, I enjoy those games a lot because it's fun for me to try to get them to do something or make them to make a mistake because I'm bluffing something or whatever have you. But I think that's a really cool element that can be really fun to exploit.
Yeah. And from Magic the Gathering, whereby you might play like a weakish attack that you don't necessarily care about, and then they block it, and you kind of, the blocks are very, very limited in the deck. And then you go and hit them with the card that you really wanted to play.
Yeah.
And then I've had some games whereby playing with Sean, the guy that's making the game with me, to bring it to market, whereby you start to do like double bluffs and triple bluffs and
Yeah, it's super complex like that. Yeah, you get kind of lost in the bluffing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So like Lander is not a bluffing game. It's not
Yeah.
a negotiation game. And there are just those elements in there that maybe you don't discover them for your first 10 plays maybe, but then when you start to get those and you add those into your strategy, then suddenly it's like, you know, there's
Yeah.
loads to just enjoy. And you know, when we play board games, the thing I love is, you know, you get your friends together and there's that human, you know, emotion, and there's like, oh, moments in the game where some good or bad thing happens. And I think that's, for me, what board gaming is all about. And you don't necessarily get that in video games in the same way at all, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool to hear. I think, you know, what I enjoy about board games is like being able to play with friends and to I mean, a lot of my friends are actually made through board games and through environments like that. So I think games that are interactive and require you to interact with your opponents and your other players are really fun. And that's what really makes it interesting to me, is because it's not just you playing and them watching you the entire time. It's you engaging with them, or it's you maybe bluffing them, or you maybe doing something that would then require their attention. So I mean, there's lots of games out there that it's kind of like you just play and everyone else is on their phone while they wait for you to end your turn.
Yeah.
But you know, games that require you to either directly be involved by playing certain responses or require you to really analyze what they're doing so that you can then perform your move next. I think those are the games that I enjoy, at least, and the ones that have lots of replay value.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely that. The best kind of analogy that I have is that I've played with my friend, his wife, and his young son, who's 9, and had a 4-player game, and his son won, right? And we put kind of 14 plus on the box. So he's a bright lad. But afterwards, he said that he'd played a bunch of board games with him and he'd always just go and wander off. And, you know, he thought that we were onto something with this game because it was the first game that he'd played whereby his son was at the table the whole time and was, you know, in the game and didn't wander off once. So, you know,
Nice.
if we've made a game that can hold the attention of a 9-year-old, even if it's maybe not for them, because some of the themes involved like killing and so forth, that we thought it'd be better to have a higher age rating on the box. But, you know, if your family's kind of cool with that, then land is kind of applicable for them. And it's really pleasing to have made something that has that kind of where you are engaged and you are actively looking at what other people are doing.
Yeah, I'm sure that feels, you know, really great as a creator. And you know, of course, being able to then share a game with others is, I'm sure, a great feeling to have. I guess I'd like to then discuss more now on the Kickstarter aspect of the game, as well as marketing and what's worked for you, what's maybe not worked as well. So I guess to start it off, I want to discuss the Kickstarter. I'm aware that you did originally launch on Kickstarter, but I guess it didn't really meet the requirements of what you were hoping to get from it. I'd like to, you know, talk more about that and hear your thoughts on Kickstarter, the platform, you know, how that went and what you've learned from that.
Well, I'd say the number one takeaway message is that for anyone that's looking to make a game and to have it as a commercial product and get it into the world to manufacture, arguably more important than the game that you make is the following that you bring to Kickstarter. Now, we thought that we'd covered all the bases to build a following. So we made 160 copies of the game and sent them to board game stores and cafes around the world. Like we really covered the English speaking part of the world with the world's kind of first play before you pledge campaign, so that you could literally go in and play it in the shop. The only problem is that what we learned from that experience is that the people that potentially have gone to board game stores and cafes around the world aren't necessarily there to play such like a Euro game kind of thing. Typically, the audiences are more kind of easier to get into, quicker games. And we didn't necessarily get a following from that. We invested in going on various shows. So I flew from the UK to Los Angeles to go on Geek and Sundry. I flew to Miami to go on the Dice Tower. We sent copies of some of these 160 copies to reviewers, you know, prestigious reviewers in the industry. So looking at all of the videos that were made, and because we got most of the big ones covered, our videos must have reached 100,000 views from all of the different people that were out there that got their hands on the game. So we had all of this huge amount of kind of presence that we thought that we'd worked really hard to achieve. And we'd not spent any time necessarily working on the individual interactions on Facebook of like, hey, this is a card, should it be blue or red? Mm-hmm. Because we only had finite times because we're doing this around our day jobs, and we didn't value that social interaction to build a following very highly, because we thought, well, we'll invest our time in making the thing good, and then we'll get it to all of the people in the world for them to play. They'll see that it's good, and then we'll do well on Kickstarter. So the main point that I want to say is that the following that we made with all of this investment, we only had 322 backers. And we thought that we would smash through our funding goal, and we didn't. So the key piece of advice I would say is that starting right from square one, arguably for every one thing you do with your game, you need to go and talk about it on social media, and you need to build your following, because your following is the difference between you being successful or not. It's seemingly there's no shortcut. Another way is that, you know, this could be a contentious point, but I think that people on Kickstarter as an audience aren't very supportive of first-time creators. They don't trust you, even though we'd made all the copies, and effectively it was our second Kickstarter. We never went to Kickstarter, you know, we made the copies and got them into the world. They still didn't trust us because it says 0 created or 1 created. So fundamentally, I'd argue that no one on Kickstarter trusts a first-time creator. Mm-hmm. And the only way that you can make your game and bring it into the world is that you really need to put a lot of time, maybe 50% of your time, into building your audience. And you've got to bring that audience with you when you launch. And if you need 500 units to be made, it's not enough, because manufacturers have minimum order quantities of, say, 1,000 or 1,500, depending on your manufacturer. So you need to think about, if 10% of the people on your email list are actually going to back you and give you money, and you need 1,000 units, then you need an email list which is 10,000 people big. And you need to work on that as much as you need to work on your game. And that's probably the key takeaway message that we learned through this whole journey.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because most creators aren't necessarily doing this full time. They have their own job. They want to, of course, make their game as good as possible. So any free time they have is generally put into that. But and it's also difficult too, because you know, just because you have a great game doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have a great following, or you have a great conversion of, you know, people that have heard about your game to actually purchasing your game. So I'm curious, you know, now that you have this perspective, what are you doing more to get that engaged following?
So at the moment, we're basically starting our journey now to relaunch, probably over the next 6 months. So we've gone on Facebook and we looked at various pieces of feedback out there. So the game originally was called Lander, Your Story Begins Here. Well, we crashed and burned on Kickstarter. We put out a bunch of names to Facebook, to our kind of following on there. And, you know, let's think of a more engaging title as we heard feedback. So we're now going to go and relaunch with Lander After the Crash. And this links fully into the fact that you've crash landed on this planet. It's also, we crashed and burned with our first Kickstarter, and hopefully after that, we've learned a whole lot more. And we listened to so much feedback. we basically, we broke down the feedback that we heard from a whole bunch of people into three things. We didn't have a solo mode, and solo gaming is very important, especially with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
The price of the game was too high. We made this deluxe, beautiful thing with all of these things, and we basically learned that, okay, we need to kind of strip out all of that deluxe stuff and come to market with a game. So we launched at, say, $85. We're going to relaunch at $59. So we've managed to take out a significant cost of the game. And the third element is that our interlocking tiles had abstract artwork, and they were black. And people said that they wanted that to be like a brown, like a planet's surface,
Okay.
and have graphically pretty artwork on the tiles. So we've looked at those three things. We've taken the game apart, and making a solo mode was very challenging because we're not solo gamers. So we had to learn kind of a lot about what is involved from a solo game, and ask the community, you know, is it acceptable to roll a dice to represent an AI? And people said yes, and people said it's more exciting when the dice roll is different in different situations.
Okay.
And we're really proud of the solo mode that we've made, because using one dice and some tables of the dice rolls, we've managed to make an experience where it feels like you're playing against another human. And it's hard, it's challenging. And I genuinely hope that you lose the first 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 games you play, because it's a genuine like challenge, and then you beat it, and because you've kind of learned how, you know, to do well with the solo mode, if you know what I mean. And you know, I'm an experienced player, and I've got the AI to the point whereby it can beat me kind of fairly, as it were. And it's a kind of a fun challenge. And what we're able to do in the way that we've done it is that the number of mission stars you need in each category, you can set how complex you want to make it. So if you want an easy game, you say 5 mission stars in each category, and then 6, 7, 8. So it might be kind of like easy, medium, hard, insane. And then I've beaten it once on 888 as construction, research, and logistics missions, but it's very, very, very difficult to do that. So I'm really, really pleased with kind of how we've managed to make something which can scale to your enjoyment level.
Yeah, that's really cool. It sounds like a lot of this is based on the feedback of users, you know, asking them directly or asking them and then getting their feedback and then making the game even better. And I'm sure by doing that, by getting them engaged in the game and the actual creation of the game, that makes them more engaged and more serious followers, and maybe even people that would then share the game with others and convert additional people to being followers as well.
I was going to say our next stage from here is, now that we've listened to everyone that we heard a voice from, we've really made significant changes, almost to the fact that it's a different game, even though it's kind of the same game. But in listening to all of that feedback, I think the game is even better, like a factor better than it was. And we thought it was a great game before when we went for our first launch. But from listening to all of those people, our next strategy is to make the Notify Me page on Kickstarter. And previously what we did is set a date and said, on this date we will launch, and geared all of our work with all the interviews and some Facebook ads and what have you to a launch date. What we're now going to do is say, okay, well, let's say that we need 500 units to make the game. Well, we're going to try and get 5,000 people following us on the Notify Me, and then we'll launch. And we're going to drive our, you know, advertising or just talking in the community, or we've made a solo mode in Tabletop Simulator so that people will be able to play the game a bit. So there'll be a bunch of things that we're going to do, but rather than just having like how many people follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or do loads of videos or pay for the Facebook banners at the top of these different pages. We did all of that and it didn't work. We're basically going to kind of talk to people, say, hey, you know, I think you'll love our game because of these reasons. And if you're interested, just go on this website link and click on the notify me. So all of our work is going to focus on that avenue. And then, you know, 10% of 5,000, we get 500 to 1,000 people, then the game is going to come into the world. And that's our strategy.
That makes a lot more sense. I think a lot of people, they have a date in mind, and maybe it's realistic, maybe it's not, but they have this date in their mind and then they just commit to it. But, you know, while it's great to commit to things, I mean, it's also does not work out sometimes, because if you have a date and you haven't actually met the right metrics for that date, like, you know, like you said, maybe 5,000 followers, 10,000 followers, whatever you want for it based on that conversion rate. If you don't do it based on that, then you're kind of flipping a coin. You're kind of just rolling a dice. It's not really set in stone in that sense. It's not really going to be a success. But if you have it based on metrics that are, you know, actually calculated and actually make sense, then yeah, doing it based on that and not based on the date, I think that's the way to go.
Yep. And I think that most people that make a game, you know, invest a lot of time and money into it, because artwork and prototypes and everything is not cheap. But nobody seems to have, you know, $100,000 or $200,000 to buy 1,000 units. So I think it's so important to be able to get your metrics up. Almost, it's more important than the game being any good.
Yeah.
Because if you have you know, let's just say a bad game, and you have 20,000 people on your email list, then you'll probably sell 2,000 units, which gets your game in the world. And like you said, nobody wants to make a bad game, so you'll probably make a good game, or, you know, reasonably good game, and have 2,000 units in the world. So I think it's probably the most important thing. It's the biggest lesson that we learned on our journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dan, I mean, I definitely appreciate your time with this interview. I've got a lot of, you know, great insights from you. Are there any other ending remarks you want to make, or any other statements you want to make about your game or about your strategy or anything at all?
At the moment, it's not there, but please check www.landofthegame.com for kind of all the updates. You can follow us on Facebook at Land of the Game, and you know, you can see on our website more on the backstory. There's different videos. We've got, stay tuned for solo mode on Tabletop Simulator. Then stay tuned for kind of the build up to the launch, whereby we'll be doing our plan is for the first, I don't know, either 20 or 30 days, depending on how it works out. Before the launch, we'll be releasing a story that relates to the game, so that you can start to really get invested in the planet that we're on, because it describes some of the crew members, some of the things that we're doing. So there's a lot that we've got planned to kind of come back to launch for our kind of second time, and hopefully after the crash, then this time we'll come to market and we'll be successful.
Yeah, very awesome, Dan. I'm definitely excited to, you know, follow along and to see the successful launch of your game this time.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for your time and the interview. It's been really fun.